Summer is here, and this summer is exceptionally brutal in Ontario, I have to say. I almost fainted while working in somehow a long time ago top secret facility at Downsview Airport yesterday. Top secret, right? For sure. I believe this will be the longest episode if I'm not mistaken. Maybe I am. I don't know. It is June 26th of 2025 today, and it's crucial to note before we go that the fourth, if I counted right, congressional hearing is going live while I'm making the last changes to this content. Three previously hearings occurred on May 17, 2022, then July 26, 2023, and November 15, 2024. So far, this one hasn't revealed anything. And the usual suspects such as Luis Elizondo and Rear Admiral Tim Gallaudet are providing testimonials. I'm not wasting my time on another obfuscation event, and more than anything, this story is mostly not about the US. The Navy intelligence glam of San Diego is a long cry from today's narrative. Today's story is from Peru. Los zorros del desierto de Selchura aullan como demonios cuando llega la noche. ¿Sabes por qué? Para quebrar el silencio que los aterroriza. Mario Vargas Llosa. I'm positive this wasn't the best Spanish impression ever, but you know what they say. Desperate times and so on. Well, the meaning in English is the foxes of the Sechura Desert howl like demons when night falls. Do you know why? To break the silence that terrifies them. Sure, we are all terrified of the unknown, and anything in the silence and crispy clear air of the Andes air may look terrifying when we are alone. Foxes, just like fighter pilots, are mostly solitary creatures, worshipped, hated, and completely misunderstood. You know what they say, there are no fighter pilots in hell. But that's Huerta's story. But what about Mario? Well, Mario attended the military school known as the Leoncio Prado Military Academy in Lima as a teenager, and that period became his most defining experience. He left the academy before graduating and went on to study literature and law, eventually winning the Nobel Prize. See, it is amazing what people can do when they not choose military as a career. Thank God I left the military at the same age. I would be equally miserable if I have stayed. Well, I don't know about the Nobel Prize. Anyways, Peru is a picturesque country, and part of it is the Nazca Desert, commonly referred to as portion of Peru's larger coastal desert region, which is where the famous Nazca lines are situated, rather than the Sechura Desert described in author's line from the beginning of the story. And the phrase Sechura, also known as Nazca Desert, is sometimes used to refer to the entire arid coastal plain of southern Peru, but in reality, it is not accurate, and the Nazca lines are located much further south, between the towns of Nazca and Palpa, on the Pampas de Humana, approximately 400 kilometers south of Lima, while the Sechura Desert is located in northwest Peru, south of the Piura. If Daniken was still around, we could expect an interesting twist about this story. He would probably have a lot to say about it. For the younger generation, just a quick reminder that Erich von Däniken was a Swiss author best known for his books proposing that ancient human civilizations were influenced by extraterrestrials. Peru features prominently in his theories and writings, particularly through his interpretations of archaeological sites and artifacts. Von Däniken brought global attention to the Nazca lines in his 1968 book Chariots of the Gods, suggesting that these massive geoglyphs in the Peruvian desert were created under the guidance of extraterrestrials. Well, Mr. Däniken, I really enjoyed your books, but that was when I was 10, 11 years old, which was right there in between the 70s and the 80s. Suddenly, there comes another von, this time Ernst von Kuhn, who wasn't Swiss but German, born in Munich, Germany. Von Kuhn was the editor of Lines and Figures of the Nazca Culture in Peru and the author of other publications. Maria Reiche, the foremost authority on the topic, contributed to it with articles and studies on the Nazca lines. Reiche was born in Dresden, Germany, and in 1932 she moved to Peru to work as a teacher for the son of the German consul in Cusco, eventually settling in Lima, where she became a scientific translator. Again, her story is fascinating as well, but I have to move on. One day I might go back to tell you my Daniken stories in details, but there is a lineup of other figures in front of him, so I'm not sure when is that going to be. Whatever it is, in this time and age of people who genuinely believe the world is flat, Daniken could actually be considered down-to-earth, no-nonsense guy. Well, still, we have David Icke, and his imagination is something to bet on in whatever case. I personally really like him, but I don't believe one word he believes it's true. In any case, Daniken believed that the Nazca people could not have created such accurate and massive images without aerial support, and he thought that the long, straight lines and some of the geometric designs were landing strips for extraterrestrial aircraft. An ancient civilization known as the Nazca people, which thrived on Peru's southern coast from starting around 200 BC. Again, that has almost nothing to do with what I'm about to tell you today, but I'm just getting high on all this incoming information, because today is the day I'm not going to tell you that the Peruvian Air Force is using Nazca technology. No, it was mostly Soviet. It was Sukhoi 22, and at the time I'm writing this, I received news over my Twitter channel that Russian pilot on the so-called Eastern Front, while piloting Su-25, shot down his wingman. Luckily, that's not what happened to Huertas. Peruvian Air Force doesn't shoot their own wingmen. These guys are so badass, they engage with the extraterrestrials. Will Smith style with Latin 30mm flare. Still, if you're serious about anything archaeological or scientific for that matter, especially when it comes to Peru and Latin America, there is another way. Many people refer to Julio Citelo as the father of Peruvian archaeology and acknowledge him as the most well-known archaeologist in Peru. He made important findings concerning the ancient cultures of Peru, such as the Paracas and Chavin civilizations, and was the first native archaeologist in South America. Telo's reputation as a pioneer in the discipline was solidified by his use of scientific excavation techniques and his contribution to the establishment of Peru's National Museum of Archaeology. And yes, this story is still in Peru, but again, this story has nothing to do with civilization evolved in the arid river valleys of the Ica Valley and the Rio Grande and their alleged visitors. This story is still in Peru, but it goes only slightly back in time, 45 years in total, back to 1980. A significant diplomatic issue arose in April 1980 when thousands of Cubans applied for shelter at a Peruvian embassy in Havana. After the situation worsened, more than 125,000 Cubans emigrated to the U.S. as a result of the Mariel boat lift. This incident became a pivotal moment in Cold War, Latin American diplomacy, and strained Peru's ties with Cuba. Early in April of 1980, Cubans applied for asylum at the Peruvian embassy in Havana. This began on April 1st, 1980, when 6 Cuban nationals entered the embassy, sparking a significant refugee crisis. And that took place just 10 days before the April 11th La Joya event. I'm merely attempting to paint you a picture by providing you with the appropriate geopolitical triangulation of the events. I'm not making any suggestions or anything of the sort that the Peruvian military regime or their claimed allies took to create a public distraction to stop what is about to happen. But yes, I was thinking about that. So, just for the record, this incident took place prior to the May 18, 1980 general elections in Peru. In 1980, Peru transitioned from 12 years of military rule to a civilian government. The presidential elections resulted in Fernando Belaúnde Terry of Acción Popular returning to the presidency, leading a center-right alliance with the Popular Christian Party. This period marked a renewed emphasis on democratic governance, with reforms such as returning previously nationalized media to their original owners and restoring freedom of expression. Peruvian dissidents, or opposition if you want, in the 80s ranged from violent Maoist insurgents like the Shining Path or Sendero Luminoso and Amartya to legal leftist parties and nonviolent civil society groups. The armed groups, especially the Shining Path, left a devastating legacy of violence, while the return to democracy enabled broader participation and gradually marginalized the appeal of the armed rebellion. The Maoist guerrilla group Sendero Luminoso, led by Abimael Guzman, launched its armed struggle against the state in the 1980s. Their first attack occurred on the eve of the elections, and the group rapidly escalated its campaign of violence, targeting rural areas and later urban centers. The Belaúnde administration responded slowly and hesitantly to the insurgency, declaring a state of emergency and deploying the armed forces. However, the military's repressive tactics led to widespread human rights abuses and further destabilized the country. The left attempted to unify under the Izquierda Unida, or United Left, coalition and made electoral gains, but the escalating conflict and economic turmoil posed significant obstacles. The 1980 elections were notable for allowing illiterate citizens to vote for the first time, and the results were widely accepted as legitimate by the population. The transition from dictatorship to democracy in Peru in 1980 had a profound and complex impact on the Peruvian military, including its air force. The military had ruled Peru from 1968, and remember, that was the year of Tet Offensive in Vietnam, civil rights movement, student protests, Prague Spring. Apollo 8 became the first crewed space aircraft to orbit the moon. Also, cultural milestones like the Beatles' White Album and Stanley Kubrick's 2001 Space Odyssey. And, of course, Mexico City Olympics. The 1968 Summer Olympics were held in Mexico City, notable for the Black Power salute by U.S. athletes Tommy Smith and John Carlos. From 1968 to 1980, Peruvian military was forced to relinquish direct control over the government with the return to civilian rule under President Fernando Belaúnde Terry, and this caution limited the extent to which the armed forces, including the Air Force, could be fully subordinated to democratic institutions. The Air Force, like the rest of the military, shifted from a politically dominant institution to one primarily tasked with internal security and counterinsurgency. This period set the stage for ongoing tensions between democratic institutions and the military in Peru. I am mentioning all of this because I believe that Americans are not the only ones who uses literally outlandish sensationalism to cover real problems and or other secret projects for the longest period of time. Of course, there is no credible evidence or declassified documentation indicating that the CIA directly interfered in or influenced the outcome of the 1980 Peruvian elections. Most available sources and historical records focus on earlier periods of CIA involvement in Peru, such as the 1962 elections, but do not mention covert actions related to the 1980 transition back to democracy. Declassified files, however, and historical analysis confirm that the CIA undertook covert activities to influence the outcome and prevent the left-leaning Alianza Popular Revolucionaria Americana, or APRA, party from gaining power. Notably, in the run-up to the 1963 elections, the CIA engaged in clandestine operations to sway the result and stop the left-leaning Alianza Popular in Peru. The Peruvian military and CIA were determined to stop APRA or other leftist organizations from seizing power when a military junta took over in July 1962 to prevent APRA from doing so. Well, the military was willing to do whatever it took to accomplish this goal. Following the elections, which APRA was poised to win, the Peruvian military, concerned about APRA's rise, staged a coup in July 1962 to block their victory. The CIA supported the military anti-APRA stance, reflecting broader U.S. Cold War policy to limit leftist influence in Latin America. And in the 80s, there is also a border conflict with Ecuador, and then in January 1981, the Paquisha War broke out between Peru and Ecuador over disputed territory in the Amazon Basin. Peru's military engagement was justified internationally as a defense against Ecuadorian incursions. Peru's relationship with the U.S. was complex. While not as strategically prioritized as Central America or Cuba, Peru received U.S. attention, particularly regarding counter-narcotics and counter-insurgency cooperation. During the 1982 Falklands War, Peru offered unconditional support to Argentina against the United Kingdom, including military aid and diplomatic backing. This stance was partly in reaction to Chile's support for the UK and reflected broader regional alignments. In 1980, the Peruvian Air Force, or Fuerza Aérea del Perú, FAP, was a key branch of the military, with an estimated 10,000 personnel. The FAP was organized into several air groups and squadrons distributed across major bases in Piura, Chiclayo, Lima, Arequipa, Joya, Iquitos, Talara, Trujillo, Huánuco, Callao, Las Palmas, Pisco, and La Joya. And the Air Force was responsible to the Minister of Defense and ultimately to the President, and at the time that was General Francisco Morales Bermudez, who was the president leading up to the elections, serving as head of state from 1975 until the restoration of civilian rule in July of 1980. The 1980 elections marked the end of this military government and the return to democracy in Peru. The Peruvian army was commanded by General Francisco Morales Bermudez, who started his military career as a second lieutenant in the engineering corps after graduating from the Chorrillos Military Academy in 1943. He advanced through the ranks to become a general, eventually holding the position of Chief of the Army General Staff and President of Peru. Most people know General Luis Arias Graziani as the Commander General of the Peruvian Air Force from 1979 to 1982 at the time of the La Joya event. Arias Graziani also served as Chief of the Joint Command of the Armed Forces in 1979 and later as Minister of Defense and a member of the Truth and Reconciliation Commission. He was recognized for his integrity and leadership, particularly during the transition from military to civilian rule in Peru at the time of La Joya incident. We could also conclude that he was a friendly person, but what does that tell us? Nothing. So the 1970s and early 1980s saw significant modernization and expansion with the acquisition of advanced aircraft from diverse sources, including the Soviet Union, France, and the United States. By 1980, the FAP operated approximately 138 combat aircraft, making it one of the largest and best-equipped air forces in Latin America at the time. Key aircraft in service included the Dassault Mirage 5P, which was a French supersonic fighter bomber, first in South America, and Sukhoi Su-22. I believe NATO code was Fitter, which was a Soviet variable geometry strike aircraft introduced in 1977 and 1979. And just for your information, Pavel Sukhoi founded the business in 1939, and during World War II, it first built airplanes for the Soviet military. Sukhoi eventually became a pioneer in the development of jet fighters over the years, greatly enhancing Soviet and the Russian air strength. Sukhoi experienced restructuring and privatization when the Soviet Union broke apart, ultimately emerging as a key player in the United Aircraft Corporation, a state-owned conglomerate that brings together a number of significant Russian aerospace firms. And yes, Sukhoi Su-22 was what Oscar Santa Maria Huertas flew at the time of the incident on April 11, 1980. You have to understand that Su-22 was the most advanced fighter aircraft in Peru at the time. The aircraft has variable sweep wings which allow the aircraft to adjust its wing angle for optimal speed, lift, and maneuverability during different phases of flight. It's a single-pilot plane typically powered by a Tumansky R29 series turbojet engine on most export versions, or the Lyulka AL21F3 turbojet on later variants. The plane is also equipped with two 30mm NR-30 autocannons with 160 rounds total, up to 4,000 kilo of bombs, which 4 tons, I guess, right? Rockets, missiles, including air-to-air and air-to-surface, and gun pods on multiple hardpoints. Plane's maximum speed is approximately 1,400 kilometers or 870 miles per hour at sea level. Service ceiling is slightly more than 40,000 meters or 46,000 feet. Combat range around 1,200 kilometers, 710 miles, and widely exported to countries such as Peru, Iraq, Syria, Afghanistan, Poland, and other countries. The Su-22 gained additional attention due to its involvement in various conflicts and notable incidents, such as the 1980 Peruvian Air Force encounter with an unidentified flying objects, where pilot Oscar Santamaria Huertas flew a Sukhoi during the incident. Funny enough, the greatest ally of the country at the time were U.S. The Peruvian military and police forces received training and support from the U.S., including specialized counterterrorism units such as the Sinchis. However, the Air Force fleet remained mixed. Political and economic considerations were the main reasons why the Peruvian Air Force selected the Soviet Su-22 over American aircraft in the middle of the 1970s. The so-called revolutionary government of the armed forces, which ruled Peru at the time, aimed to lessen reliance on Western, particularly American, military suppliers, while pursuing anti-imperialistic goals. Because Western nations disapproved of these practices, Peru had trouble obtaining cutting-edge military hardware from the United States or its allies. Given all-encompassing assistance, Peru started buying the Su-22 fitter and associated gear in 1976. Peruvian officials resorted to the Soviet Union after their attempts to acquire cutting-edge Western aircraft failed. In need of hard cash, the Soviets offered enticing terms, such as the option to pay a portion of the price in commodities like bread, fish, copper, and iron ores. Well, this is ridiculous. How much fish do you need for a freaking jet fighter? Well, this agreement, together with the Soviet Union's readiness to supply contemporary functional aircraft, other aircraft included the English electric Canberra, which were British bombers, then Antonov 2632, before it was Soviet, now it's, we know, Ukrainian, transport aircraft, then the Lockheed C-130 Hercules and L-120 U.S. transport aircraft. Then there was Cessna A-37B Dragonfly, which was a U.S. light attack and counterinsurgency aircraft, and a variety of helicopters, including MiL-Mi-8, Mi-17, which is the one my wartime buddy and a neighbor was flying, and Mi-25. Although the FAP's main objective was national defense, it was also vital to domestic security, particularly in 1980, when the government had to contend with the Shining Path insurrection. The Air Force participated in anti-narcotics initiatives, especially in the Upper Huallaga Valley, supported insurgent operations, and offered air connections to far-flung locations, most notably the Amazon. However, the economic crisis in the late 1980s compelled fleet readiness and size reductions. Peru has been the site of several high-profile UFO and alleged alien encounters, ranging from dramatic crash retrieval stories to mysterious attacks on remote villages and the controversial discovery of so-called alien mummies. In 1997, U.S. Marine Lance Corporal Jonathan Weygand claimed to have witnessed a UFO crash in Peru while deployed on a classified mission. According to his testimony, the craft had a palpable energy field that caused disorientation and appeared both metallic and organic, with a thick, syrupy fluid leaking from it. Weigand described seeing a four-fingered arm hanging from the wreckage, suggesting a non-human occupant. Shortly after the discovery, a group of unmarked personnel described as Americans with black uniforms and no insignia arrived, took control, and threatened Weigand to remain silent. He was then detained and interrogated before being flown out of the area. The incident was later publicized through the Disclosure Project, which collects whistleblower accounts related to UFOs and government secrecy. Then there was Pelacaras attacks in rural Peru in 2023. Villagers in rural Peru reported being harassed and attacked by mysterious beings dubbed Pelacaras, or face peelers. Witnesses described these entities as having long heads, yellowish eyes, and the ability to fly or hover using advanced technology. There were even claims of a kidnapping attempt on a teenage girl. The Peruvian Navy and police investigated and concluded that the perpetrators were not extraterrestrials but rather illegal gold miners from Colombia and Brazil using advanced flying gear to terrorize the community. White volcanic rock formations, the most remarkable of which are UNESCO listed, are found beneath some of the most identifiable peaks in Peru's southern Andes. Arequipa has a special beauty. According to linguist Rodolfo Cerón Palomino, the 18th century anthropologist Ernst Middendorf had already suggested that the city's name might have come from the Aymara phrase Arequipa, which translates to peak, mountaintop, and behind. And this phrase alludes to the nearby volcano Misti. This is personally extraordinary because my hometown Zagreb shares a similar explanation for the name. On August 15, 1540, the city was established under the name Beautiful Villa of Our Lady of the Assumption under the Marquis Francisco Pizarro. Carlos V, the monarch, gave the decree to rename it the city of Arequipa on September 22, 1541. It gained prominence because of its exceptional economic contribution and its loyalty to the Spanish crown, as evidenced by the titles Very Noble and Very Loyal bestowed upon it. Known by its nicknames Ciudad Blanca, Spanish for White City, and León del Sur, or Spanish for South Lion, Arequipa in Spanish, Arequipa in Aymara and Quechua, is a city in Peru that serves as the capital of the province and department of the same name. It is frequently referred to as the legal capital of Peru and serves as the location of the Constitutional Court. According to the 2017 national census, the city has almost 1,200,096 residents, making it the second most populated city in Peru after the capital, Lima. And it wasn't only Peru. Earlier Air Force engagements occurred about the same time period. I don't know who remembers this, but I do. 2 F-4 Phantom II aircraft from the Imperial Iranian Air Force were sent to intercept a UFO over Tehran in early morning hours on September 19, 1976. Yeah, I was 70 years old. No, it wasn't Mossad, okay? Forget about it. Then in June 1979, Italian Air Force pilot Marshal Giancarlo Cecconi, flying a light fighter bomber Fiat G91R, encountered and took pictures of a cylindrical UFO near Treviso, Italy. The object was described as emitting intense multicolored lights, and both jets experienced instrumentation and communication failures as they approached it. Still, the one in Peru was different. The most well-known UFO incident involving a Peruvian pilot happened on April 11, 1980, less than a year after the incident in Treviso, when Lieutenant Oscar Santamaria Huertas of the Peruvian Air Force encountered an unidentified flying object close to the La Joya Air Force Base in Arequipa, Peru, which was one of the few known instances, possibly the only one, of a military pilot shooting at a UFO with no results whatsoever. At age 23 and holding the rank of lieutenant, how can I not be sentimental? Well, I was a similar situation. Long story, never mind. Oscar Santamaria Huertas was ordered to intercept and shoot down an anomalous object flying over the La Joya Air Base in Arequipa, Peru. More than 1,800 people at the base reported seeing the item, which was described as a silver sphere about 10 meters in diameter without any windows, rivets, or apparent propulsion mechanism. Santa Maria, piloting a Sukhoi Su-22 fighter jet, fired 64 rounds of 30mm ammunition at the object, but the object was unharmed and started to rise quickly, doing maneuvers that were beyond possible. Well, it was the Noodleman Richter Design Bureau who produced the NR-30 30mm gun for the Su-22. Actually, the cannons were created at Moscow's KB Tokmash, also known as the Precision Engineering Design Bureau, in honor of A.E. Noodleman. Established in 1934, this bureau rose to prominence as a key Soviet organization for designing missiles, aircraft guns, and other cutting-edge weapons. Following Yakov Tobin's arrest as the original creator, Alexander Noodleman assumed leadership of the agency and oversaw the creation of numerous recognizable Soviet autocannons until 1987. The most famous accomplishment of Soviet weapons designer Yakov Grigorievich Taubin, who was born in 1900 and got executed in 1941, was the development of the first effective automatic grenade launcher. In 1934, he established the design studio OKB-16, which later became KB Tokmash, which was again a major hub for the development of Soviet missile systems, grenade launchers, and autocannons. Yeah, we know the story. It's nothing very new there. He was detained and put to death by Soviet authorities in 1941 on suspicion of producing technically imperfect weapons too soon, a fate that was common for Soviet engineers at the time. Following his passing, OKB-16's legacy in Soviet and later Russian military technology was carried on and expanded by Alexander Noodleman, who assumed control of the program. And no, the cannon he designed didn't malfunction over La Joya. But enough of going down the rabbit hole of superior Soviet engineering. Whatever it wasn't Tobin's or Noodleman's mistake. What happened with Lieutenant Oscar Huertas over La Joya was unexplainable, and it definitely wasn't because the cannon on Su-22 malfunctioned. The pilot didn't hit or identify the item during almost 25-minute aerial pursuit before having to return to base because of fuel constraints. The mystery was increased by the fact that UFO was visible to the unaided eye but was not picked up by radar. And this incident, which has been documented in declassified U.S. Department of Defense records, is regarded as a seminal case in UFO history. In interviews and testimony before the U.S. Congress, Oscar Santamaria Huertas has discussed his experience, highlighting the object's inexplicable nature. Again, you have to understand that on the day, 1,800 military personnel and civilians were present at the base and observed the object. The UFO was described as a luminous, stationary, and balloon-like object about 10 meters in diameter with a shiny dome and a metallic base. It lacked wings, engines, windows, or visible propulsion. The incident was formally reported to the U.S. Department of Defense and documented only 2 months later on June 3, 1980, with a message released by the Defense Intelligence Agency. The Peruvian Air Force accepted the sighting as an official case, and Huertas continued his career without negative repercussions. Later on, Lieutenant Huertas stated, "I find myself in the unique position, at least for the moment, and as far as I know, of being the only military pilot in the world who has actually fired a weapon and struck a UFO. It still gives me a chills to think about it." This incident is widely cited in UFO literature and by researchers as one of the very few well-documented military engagements with a UFO, with a large number of witnesses and official recognition by the Peruvian government. Many UFO researchers and witnesses, including Huertas himself, have suggested that the object was not a conventional aircraft, balloon, or drone, but something entirely unknown, possibly extraterrestrial. This explanation is supported by the object's ability to withstand direct cannon fire evade interception with rapid and unconventional maneuvers and hover motionless for hours. Well, given the Cold War backdrop and the presence of Soviet military equipment at the base, Huertas and the Peruvian Air Force at first thought the item might be a balloon or a foreign surveillance device. However, after observing the object's behavior and resilience to attack, observers mainly rejected this interpretation. The notion of an atmospheric or optical illusion, such as the weather balloon reflecting sunlight, has been suggested by some doubters. However, this is not generally accepted because numerous military personnel have provided detailed visual evidence. And according to another version, the item might have been a foreign or domestic experimental craft that used cutting-edge technology that the Peruvian military was unaware of at the time. The object's absence of discernible propulsion or control surfaces, however, has not been explained, and no evidence has emerged to substantiate this. Leslie Keen's book, UFOs, Generals, Pilots, and Government Officials Go on the Record, and interviews with Lieutenant Oscar Santamaria Huertas provide the main source, which includes the extensive descriptions. The incident was acknowledged in records made public by the CIA and the U.S. Department of Defense, indicating that military intelligence took it seriously and that it was still unsolved. Well, you also have to understand that the strange silvery object was floating without authorization near the La Joya runway, which was again an important military facility, and due to spying Cold War tensions, it was a pretty restricted area, so the whole situation represented a huge challenge for national sovereignty. Lieutenant Huertas quickly climbed to 2,500 meters prepared for an attack run on an orb-like object. Later he said, "I reached the necessary distance and shot a burst of 60 30mm shells which created a cone-shaped wall of fire that would normally obliterate anything in its path. Assuming the object was a balloon, would be torn to shreds with bursts of outpouring gas, but the barrage had no effect on the object. Immediately following the barrage, the object shot skywards, forcing Huertas to activate his afterburners and accelerate to 1.6 Mach. After 84 kilometers of chase, the object came to instant standstill, forcing the Lieutenant Huertas to take a sharp turn to avoid collision. Huertas then began to re-engage. He locked on the target and he was ready to shoot, but at that moment the object made another sudden climb, so the pilot was left underneath. He didn't know what to do, so Huertas climbed again, trying to attack from the above at 14,000 feet, but the object shadowed his moves and flew to almost 20,000 feet. Okay, it was 19,200 feet, and that was that much, right? So Huertas was also running low on fuel, and one last time he approached the object to almost 100 meters to take a closer look. He said that he was startled because the object wasn't balloon at all. It was 10 meters in diameter, shiny dome on top was cream colored, similar to a light bulb cut in half. No exhaust, no windows, no propulsion or antennae, nothing. Eventually, Huertas returned to the airport, to FAP, not Nazca landing strip, and that was it. If United States Department of Defense was interested in this, well, there was something about it. It was the same year when in Brazil and USA 2 other UFOs, no, I'm not going to say UAPs, occurred. First one was when Elias Seixas de Matos, who was a truck driver from Rio de Janeiro in 1980, had suffered an unexplainable experience. His story, along with the ones from his two friends, has earned an important page in the history of Brazilian ufology because of the quantity of details he displayed to describe the situations. The one in U.S. was the so-called Cash Landrum incident, a UFO sighting near Hoffman, Texas, which is northeast of Houston, on December 29, 1980, which witnesses claimed was responsible for causing health and property damage. Uncharacteristically for such UFO reports, this resulted in civil court proceedings, though the case ended up in dismissal. So Arequipa was mostly quiet until June 1st of 2021. There was another scene, but this time nothing was confirmed, and all we have is a blurry recording from a cell phone. And that is pretty much it for now. The relative lack of internet material regarding the La Joya UFO occurrence is caused by a number of factors, including regional focus, language obstacles, limited government disclosure, and overshadowing by more well-publicized incidents, or at least that's what they say the reason is. Huertas gained international recognition for sharing his perspective after retiring. He has taken part in significant news conferences, including the 2013 National News Club hearing in Washington, D.C., where he and other military witnesses pushed governments to make UFO encounter information public. He has provided researchers and the media with in-depth details of the occurrence, participated in films, and conducted interviews. Oscar Santamaria Huertas is still alive and still talks about the La Joya incident and related UFO occurrences. He continues to play a significant role in conversations concerning military UFO encounters and is frequently mentioned as a retired colonel. I will be back to UFOs, and I will be back to gorgeous Latin America, which fascinates me more and more as I learn straight from the source from my beautiful Latin friends and colleagues. I was actually really interested in Mexico UFO incident from the early 2000s, but let's see how it goes first. I have other things to cover as well. Otherwise, I would totally have to weaponize myself if I stick to UFOs forever. And as I have said, summer is here, and this summer is exceptionally brutal in Ontario. I almost fainted at the airport, and I believe this was the longest episode so far. Let me know if I'm mistaken. I haven't covered the summer equinox this time, but if you're curious about it, go back to episode 6 or A Note to Equinoxes, where I talk about Incas, and also last year episode 18 from June 19th of 2024, which are completely dedicated to summer solstice. Until something new regarding the equinoxes or solstices comes out, enjoy the best seasonal slice of the year in this unbearable furnace-like weather. Stay cool and stay selective. Bye-bye.